a poor boy named Lloyd is unceremoniously kicked out of his group of adventurers. But let's go back many days earlier. Lloyd is left speechless when he sees a woman conjure fire in the palm of her hand. She tells him to do the same, or else he'll go without dinner. So, little Lloyd tries his hardest to do as he's told. Sometime later, he returns to the same woman, promising that, after much training, he'll finally manage the feat. And when he actually manages to produce flames in his hand, his tutor offers a rare compliment. But before he can savor it, she snuffs out his fire and roasts him with a spell dozens of times stronger. According to her, he still has a long road ahead. The next day, Lloyd stomps the ground, trying to make some new technique work. When nothing happens, his instructor decides to show him how it's done. Without breaking a sweat, she opens a hole in the earth that nearly causes water to gush out. Lloyd copies her and manages to dampen the dirt, too. But as soon as he's praised again, he's immediately blasted by her magic, showing him what real water magic looks like. On another day, the little guy almost bursts a vein trying to manipulate the wind. Fed up with his antics, the teacher sends him flying with a single breath. When snow covers the land, Lloyd decides it's time to practice with this new element. Proudly, he shows his master a snowman he's made to look just like her. Not one to break tradition, she uses the very same snowman to grab him and drop him from a considerable height, after magically making the snowman enormous. After digging himself out from beneath the pile, Lloyd realizes he needs more power and vows to work even harder. Then, there's the day his master is way past tipsy after a few too many bottles. Nursed by a monstrous hangover, she hears her apprentice ask if she's okay. She admits she's not at all. Lloyd, undeterred, places a hand on her forehead and prepares a healing spell. Feeling a bit better, the woman admits the boy's gotten pretty good at healing, and gives him a rare, affectionate hug. Lloyd is proud to have helped her. But there's no time to bask in it. She's already recovered and ready to dive back into magic training. Days fly by, and the young mage's training never lets up. One night, the teacher seems troubled as she gazes at a book locked away in a box. Lloyd arrives to say dinner is ready, and the woman accidentally drops the book. Lloyd picks it up to hand it back, but as he does, he's struck by some magical reaction. Realizing what's happened, his master sees that he has the potential to become a chosen one himself, probably his fate from now on. She puts the boy to bed after the shock and promises she won't let him repeat her mistakes, especially becoming overconfident just because his skills are above average. With that thought, she kisses the boy's forehead, leaving a blue mark behind. The next day, the instructor explains that a white mage is someone who uses magic for the benefit of others. Lloyd regenerates a piece of fruit and earns a compliment. But his master immediately goes further, regenerating the whole tree and bringing it back to life with her healing magic. That's one of the reasons Lloyd admires her so much. That night, she tells Lloyd that, according to what she's heard, some beastmen can use rare magic to control monsters. Lloyd's curiosity is piqued by a mention of ancient magic in the book on the table. But the teacher's expression darkens, and she says he doesn't need to learn that it's just a type of magic that's been extinct for centuries. The following day, Lloyd conjures a staff, but his teacher thinks he's way too slow. She conjures her own scepter and knocks the poor kid's legs out from under him, sending him tumbling. She explains that he needs to speed up and reminds him that, as inexperienced as he is, he must never get complacent with his training. Later that same day, the two sit at the table to continue studying. Lloyd reads about the Magistone, which his teacher explains is a crystallization of mana powerful enough to turn things nearby into Magistones. Days pass. When they finally reach a certain forest, the master takes off Lloyd's blindfold. With a wild beast lurking in the woods, the woman hands her apprentice a knife and tells him to make it home within a week. His mission: survive using only magic. The moment she leaves him, Lloyd is attacked by a giant wolf. He runs, not caring if he looks like a coward. After escaping up a tree, he realizes he can't yet defeat monsters with a white mage spells, so all he can do is keep running until he's strong enough to fight back. Looking around, he sees just how far from home he really is. Climbing down, Lloyd stores the knife with a spell and keeps moving as the sun sets. At night, he regenerates a fruit from a tree to eat and collects more to take to a cave, where he'll be safe until morning. Drawing a magic circle on the ground, the young mage plans to tweak the design a bit and channel more power into his finger to improve his skills. With the sunrise comes more hardship. Lloyd has to cross a mountain with his climbing gear, and it's no easy task. That night, he shelters in the hollow of a tree and redraws his magic circle, working to control the flow of mana. Day by day, Lloyd presses on, always seeking to sharpen his talents and his mastery of sorcery. Every night, he practices his magic circle. He also works on improving his detection magic. If he doesn't, he could end up starving. By combining two circles, the young mage hopes to boost his running speed. One morning during his week-long adventure, Lloyd accidentally steps on a branch and draws the attention of a giant spider. Once again, he takes off. And when he tests out his newly improved speed circle, it actually works, letting him escape unharmed. Running flat out, Lloyd finally makes it back home but passes out before he can even knock on the door. His master soon finds him and welcomes her apprentice back. Day and night raced on, one after the other, without pause. While tidying up a room in the house, Lloyd stumbled upon a book that immediately caught his eye. The cover was a painting of a city. Just then, his master appeared, telling the kid to get back to cleaning. But Lloyd, his voice noticeably deeper and more mature now, asked if he could borrow the book. The very next day, as Lloyd was sweeping the floor, his master called on him for help with a spell that could halt the aging process. The day after that, she interrupted him while he was hanging laundry on the clothesline, asking for a hand with a healing spell. Another day, over lunch, the mage revealed she'd thought up a new enhancement magic. That night, Lloyd was forced to drink a potion that kept him awake for an entire week just so he wouldn't need to rest and could keep working. Even so, he finally managed to find a moment to take a look at the book he'd asked to borrow. The next morning, his master went to wake her student for more experiments, but his room was empty. She spotted the book with the city on the cover, lying on the table, and realized the connection. Meanwhile, young Lloyd was making his way through the forest, heading straight for the very city he'd seen on that book's cover. Once inside the city walls, the mage wandered the plaza. Wide-eyed and anxious, he'd never seen so many people together in one place before. A man carrying boxes rushed past and cursed at Lloyd for standing in the way. But all Lloyd could think was how amazing cities seemed. He traded away his last coin for a loaf of bread. But just as he was about to eat, a sudden gust of wind slapped a piece of paper against his face. The trickster responsible vanished as soon as he saw his plan succeed, leaving Lloyd to read a flyer about adventurer recruitment. Some time later, far from there, inside a shadowy dungeon, a group of warriors battled a Cyclops. Lloyd was among them, awed by the intensity of the fight. The team's leader called for Sheena to cast a healing spell, while Lloyd slammed his staff to the ground and summoned a magic circle that spread across the whole battlefield. Now, everyone on the team was buffed up and ready to end the fight. First, the archer fired an arrow straight into the monster's eye. The Cyclops retaliated with a powerful punch, but the team's tank stepped in, blocking the blow, surprised at how much lighter the impact felt than she'd expected. A sorceress cast a binding spell, wrapping the Cyclops' arms and legs and giving their leader the perfect chance to finish the job with a powerful sword strike. After their victory, the tank gave Lloyd an odd look. When the group returned to the city, the whole team was greeted with cheers for defeating the Cyclops from the castle of Abaddon. But Alan the hero was by far the most celebrated. Later, when it came time to split the mission rewards, Lloyd was handed a much smaller share than the others. Alan explained that this was what a D-rank member got, and the mage didn't complain. With that settled, the leader called for a toast to their success. But Lloyd made it clear he wasn't much of a drinker and wandered away from the group. The witch grumbled about his attitude, while Alan remarked that any white mage could have taken Lloyd's place. White mages weren't all that useful in battle, and mostly there for show anyway. Meanwhile, back at Lloyd's master's house, she was visited by a man named Will, who brought news that her apprentice had been recruited by the heroes. She was glad the boy would get real training now, but worried he might become overconfident. Will asked if her regrets still lingered. Making her uneasy, she promised herself she wouldn't repeat past mistakes. Then Will recalled how, back then, the Demon Lord had sacrificed himself trying to steal that grimoire, taking many others down with him. At a crucial moment, Sybil's ancient magic had brought everyone the Demon Lord killed back to life at the cost of her own. At dawn, back in the city, a vendor was promoting a book chronicling Alan's group and their adventures. According to him, long ago, in ancient times, this world was created by the Creator, and legend had it that the heroes' trials were left behind, the national treasures of the sacred nation, the sacred swords. One of the 4 heroes chosen by these swords was Alan, the brave warrior of Ishtar. That's why all the monsters threatening the city had been defeated, one after another. Now, Alan's name echoed through the entire kingdom of Fulin and beyond. Speaking of the city's great celebrity, Alan staggered drunkenly into a room where the team's tank was reading a book on defense, worried because lately the blows to her shield had felt odd. Alan, unconcerned, said he was feeling stronger than ever. The girl pointed out that he hadn't been training much lately, and Alan just shrugged. He figured there was no need, since he was naturally so much stronger than anyone else. Meanwhile, by a stream, 2 soldiers stood guard until they were slaughtered by a giant creature. The next day, Alan was informed that the border guards had been killed. The messenger explained that the area was also a route for black market smugglers, so it was urgent to protect the soldiers assigned there. Full of bravado, Alan insisted that taking down a few golems would be a piece of cake. Eager for action, he rallied his team and followed Lloyd, who used his search magic to guide them to a cave where, sure enough, Alan finished off a golem with a decisive strike. But then, an enemy sorcerer summoned a new golem. Lloyd quickly noticed the sorcerer was a demon. The black stone on his staff was a magistone. The tank assumes the mage is using that stone to control the golems, while Lloyd casts a magic circle to boost his allies. Once he's done, he tells Lulu to shoot the mage, so the archer fires an arrow right into the mage's chest. Immediately after, the white mage orders Mia to hand over her staff, and as soon as the witch does, the enemy mage seals the scepter. Furious, Alan makes it clear who's really in charge. He's eager to end the fight once and for all. But Lloyd warns him that without the magic stone controlling the golem, the creature's movements become completely unpredictable, making any battle extremely dangerous. Alan ignores the warning and charges straight at the giant, forcing Lloyd to rush over and push the leader out of harm's way just in time. Annoyed, Alan snaps at the kid to get out of his way, then delivers a sword strike that brings the stone creature crashing down. With the mission over, we return to the opening scene where the party leader decides to kick Lloyd out of the group. He accuses Lloyd of always hiding behind the others and leaving all the healing to Sheena. In other words, not only is Lloyd totally useless, but he's also a burden to the team. Hanging his head, the outcast admits he still lacks strength. Alan just laughs and tells the white mage to get lost. 3 days later, Lloyd is searching for a new group. After yet another failed attempt, an archer tells him they already have a white mage on their team. With each rejection, Lloyd's frustration only grows, and his luck seems to have run out. Then suddenly, he hears a girl shouting at the guild receptionist, demanding a white mage right now. The moment the staff member points Lloyd out, the adventurer sprints over like she's just found a treasure chest and grabs him by the arm. Rewinding a bit, Lloyd was wandering through the city streets, the sting of being kicked out of the group by Alan still fresh in his mind. That day, the leader had the nerve to suggest the white mage was hiding behind his teammates and leaving all the healing to Sheena. As odd as it sounds, Lloyd himself admits he wasn't all that strong back then, so he took the rejection pretty well, all things considered. On his way, Lloyd passed a fountain with a small statue of his master, which made him remember just how amazing she was. There was a time she told him he wasn't ready to handle things on his own, and now he gets it. She was right. Meanwhile, the party that was supposed to hire the white mage had gathered for a mission: infiltrate the wooden fortress of a gang called the Dirty Block. The pink-haired girl seemed confident, but even she knew this was a tough rank a quest, one that made the rest of the group uneasy. Sure, these adventurers were strong, but the enemy was huge in numbers, experienced, and incredibly organized. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. Still, the attackers hadn't come all this way for nothing. They were well coordinated too. When the mage needed cover, the archer took out her targets without missing a beat. When the warrior was about to get ambushed from behind, the tank stepped up and raised his massive shield just in time to save her. And as the cherry on top, there was a teammate in the back, always buffing her allies. With a single physical enhancement, they managed to overpower the enemy and come out on top. Realizing everything had fallen apart, the gang's surviving boss started plotting an escape, but he soon found himself cornered by the adventurers, who all wore the insignia of his rank. With nowhere left to run, the gang leader decided to go all in and summoned a giant stone golem to face the adventurers. They knew that against a rocky body like that, spells and arrows wouldn't do much, so the frontline warrior, always the first to step up, once again moved in to defend. She landed a solid sword strike to the golem's head, leaving a small crack. But it wasn't nearly enough to slow it down, not missing a beat. She called for Clum to cast physical enchantment on her. With the spell activated, she leapt back into the fray and delivered a second, vertical blow. This time, the golem split cleanly in half, as if it were made of butter. After the dust settled, Clum apologized for losing focus during the fight, making her question whether she really belonged in such a high-level group. But the warrior reassured her, saying there was nothing to worry about. Everyone understood Clum was in a tough spot, especially with her sister Sylvie going through a rough time. In the next scene, we're back at the moment when Lloyd gets turned down by the archer at the Adventurers Guild right before the pink-haired girl comes rushing in. Desperate to find a white mage, the receptionist figured the requirements for joining an S-rank party would make it almost impossible for anyone to qualify. But the team's member was willing to take just about anyone at that point. So, Lloyd, who was just minding his business, looking for a team, gets pointed out by the staff and practically dragged out of the guild by the girl. She literally pulled him by the arm until they reached the rest of the group. Surprised to see Yui back so quickly from her hunt for a white mage, since she didn't even know the kid's name, Yui asked him to introduce himself, and Lloyd, looking a bit awkward, told them. Yui then introduced Daggers, the shield bearer, Cross, the archer, Silica, the mage, and finally, herself Yui, the leader and swordswoman. The leader welcomed the group's newest member, but Lloyd quickly clarified he'd never agreed to join. Silica piped up, saying she knew this would happen. Daggers pointed out the boss hadn't explained what was going on, and Cross suggested they should just refuse the mission since they couldn't do it without Clum. Still, Yui and the others remembered the clients really needed help, and since this was a rank-A mission, only a group of their level could even accept it, as ranked teams like theirs were rare, so the job fell to them. Lloyd was floored to learn these people were so powerful, with Alan having called him useless and weak. The white mage just couldn't see himself actually helping a team this strong, but with her usual confidence, Yui hyped him up, assuring him he could handle it. So the group asked Lloyd to show them his support magic. Feeling the pressure from all their high expectations, he started sweating so much it looked like his face was melting. His self-esteem was pretty much shot. Daggers suggested they ask for a specific spell to avoid confusing the new guy, so Yui told him to cast a buff spell on the team. Cross and Silica both noted that no ordinary white mage could pull that off and thought maybe they should just forget it. Just to be sure, Lloyd asked if that was the only test to join the party, and Yui confirmed as long as he could buff everyone at once, not one by one. Once again, the pressure mounted. Lloyd was nowhere near their level, and besides Yui, none of them really believed he could do it. Still, Lloyd took a deep breath, braced himself, and reached for his staff. Suddenly, the entire party watched in awe as his staff materialized out of thin air. Lloyd used it to summon magic circles of different colors, each moving in perfect sequence until they gathered beneath the S-rank adventurers, creating a dazzling display of lights and color. Jaw dropped, Yui asked where he'd gotten that staff. Lloyd explained it was just a storage spell, but what he really wanted to know was what his teammates thought of his buff spell. Yui is left completely confused by what he meant, since she didn't even know the enhancement had actually worked. The others try to notice any changes in themselves, but only Cross feels a little lighter. To test it out, the leader walks up to a huge tree trunk and slices it clean in half with a single swing of her sword, leaving everyone standing there with their jaws on the floor. That's when Lloyd reveals he cast 5 different spells: physical enhancement, defense boost, magic power increase, mana consumption reduction, and status ailment resistance. Casting just one spell felt too simple to him, so he figured maybe everyone was expecting something a little extra. But when he sees everyone's shocked faces, the white mage thinks he's completely messed up and apologizes for doing something so low level, then starts to walk away, convinced he's not the right guy for this team. But Yui and the others quickly call him back, realizing he's misunderstood everything. Not long after, Lloyd tells everyone that he was once part of the legendary group made up of the only 4 heroes in the world, but he got kicked out for not being skilled enough. Silica admits she's never seen anyone cast so many enhancements at once like Lloyd just did, but the boy insists there are tons of white mages at his level kick any random tree and 5 just like him will fall out. Cross just has to ask where Lloyd gets this bargain bin self-esteem, while Lloyd recommends they try to get back the white mage who used to be in their group. About that, they explain Clum has a little sister who's sick, and Clum would care for her every day while still trying to go on adventures. The constant exhaustion wore down her health so much that it started affecting her work. On a mission the other day, the poor girl simply collapsed, so she decided to leave the group herself, thinking she was just causing trouble. Normally, this wouldn't be such a problem for most quests, but facing a rank challenge without a white mage, not the smartest move, which is why they're out searching for someone who fits the bill. Seeing how much the others still respect Clum, even though she's not in the group anymore, Lloyd feels a twinge of envy and asks about her little sister's illness. They admit they don't know much, but it seems to be some disease that turns the entire body into Magistone. Right then, Lloyd remembers a lesson he had from his old mentor about this. She'd explained that Magistone is a crystallization of mana, and its power tends to transform anything around it into Magistone as well. On that day, Lloyd asked her if there was any way to cure it. Thinking about it now, he asks to be taken to Clum's house. Sometime later, the white mage arrives at the former teammate's home with the current leader by his side. He cuts straight to the point, asking about Clum's younger sister. Clum explains that she used to adventure with Sylvie, her sister, but Sylvie suffered an injury in the middle of a battle that left her unconscious. To check her symptoms, Lloyd is led to the bedroom where Sylvie is resting. As soon as the door opens, he feels an overwhelming dark mana fill the entire room. Clum pulls back the blanket to reveal her sister's body, slowly being overtaken by Magistone. Lloyd says that if his theory is right, he can cure her. Clum, still in disbelief, points out that even advanced mages couldn't pull this off, but Lloyd's confident. He explains that the cause might have been a cut Sylvie suffered from a highly pure Magistone. He asks if she got hurt in a mana-rich cave, and Clum confirms they were on a mission to extract Magistone, and her sister got cut on her side. Seeing this, Lloyd realizes exactly what happened. Mana entered the wound and spread throughout her body, just like his mentor taught him. Regardless of who this kid or his teacher might be, Clum is desperate to save her sister and lets the young mage go ahead with his attempt at healing. Lloyd approaches the patient, raises his staff, and emits a light that clashes with the dark mana wrapped around Sylvie's body. The pressure is so intense he has to pause for a moment. He explains that he's using a reversed version of the mana transfer spell, drawing mana out of Sylvie, and thus reconfiguring the spell. He says the transformation to Magistone progresses because the mana is out of control, so he needs to lower it as close to zero as possible. If he can't remove that mana, any treatment will be useless. Now Lloyd starts using healing magic as well. But not just any healing spell, a broken version that consumes almost no mana, letting him absorb even more of Sylvie's mana while healing her at the same time. In the middle of all this, Yui asks if this is something hard to do, and Clum replies that hard doesn't even begin to describe it. What this mage is doing using spells he created himself and casting 2 types of magic at once is already impressive enough. But what's truly astonishing is that Lloyd has the resilience and willpower to withstand so much mana passing through him. There's no way any ordinary person could manage that. Eventually, the healing process keeps going, and Yui watches in awe as the parts of Sylvie's body that were turning into Magistones start to return to normal. Soon, when her body is completely restored, Lloyd stops the procedure and starts gasping for breath, completely exhausted. Sylvie finally wakes up to see her sister's tearful face by her side, which brings a smile to both Lloyd and Yui. After this miraculous and dangerous ordeal, Clum sincerely thanks Lloyd for his help, promising she'll go back to adventuring with her sister once Sylvie is truly well again. Before Lloyd leaves, Clum tells him she's confident he can lead the group, since he's proven what he's capable of. Even so, Lloyd reminds her he's not an official member after all. He's just not skilled enough for that. At night, the S-rank team gathers once again to hear the good news. Sylvie, Clum's sister, has finally been cured of her terrible Magistone condition. All thanks to the rookie white mage who turned out to be far more talented than anyone expected. Despite this incredible feat, Lloyd remains humble, insisting he didn't do anything special. On top of that, he can't help but feel a little down that Clum hasn't come back to the group. Still, the team is just happy their friend is getting a fresh start, which makes Lloyd acutely aware of how different things are from the awful way he was treated by his previous team. As the celebration goes on, Daggers throws out a question. If you could be reborn, what would you want to be? Silica admits she'd like to get married. Yui says the same, but adds she wants to become a great hero together with this team. Out of nowhere, Lloyd suddenly cuts in and asks if he can join the group. Instantly, it's clear everyone is on board with their new teammate, and the leader suggests they throw a welcome party for him. True to his modest nature, the white mage doesn't think that's necessary, but Yui basically forces him to go along with it. Seeing this, the others tease her, saying she just wants an excuse to drink like crazy. And Yui starts arguing with everyone, insisting that's not the case at all. Without wasting any time, the team gathers for the celebration, and Lloyd is moved by the feast his teammates have put together for him. Without overdoing the humility, he digs in with real enthusiasm, not turning down a single dish. He compliments the quality of the local food, but the others can't quite figure out why after all. This restaurant is just so-so by the town's standards. Still, considering the flavors in each dish, Lloyd remembers things weren't always like this when he was younger. Back in the days when he trained with his master. Curious, his friends ask what he means, so he explains he had a tutor who taught him magic, and she used to cook with nothing but garden herbs and wild mushrooms. Meat was a rare treat. Now everyone wants to know what kind of person his master was, and Lloyd shares that she specialized in offensive magic. In fact, it wasn't unusual for her to accidentally set off the odd explosion with her crazy experiments. Still, she taught him a few support spells since she was far more skilled than he was in every way. Excited by that description, Silica thinks about asking this mage for some tips herself one day, but Lloyd immediately warns her that doing so means putting your life on the line every day. Cross figures she must have been pretty strict, but Lloyd admits she also had a gentle side. For all her clumsiness and reckless ways, she had a kindness that really shone through. At that point, the team leader announces it's time to talk strategy. But before anything else, everyone agrees the new guy needs to be brought up to speed on the mission details. Yui, terrible at explaining things, tries to pass the responsibility to Daggers, who points out that technically, she's the team leader, but since she's dodging, he'll take over. So, the shield bearer lays it out. The goal is to wipe out groups of monsters that have been destroying farms in the area. Apparently, it's not just one kind of creature behind the attacks, but all sorts of different races banding together, which is something adventurers have never seen before. Since they're up against so many enemies, Cross admits he and Yui will have a tough time, and the captain adds that, in moments like these, they really rely on Silica's area spells. Even so, the mage points out she can't run out of mana during a crucial battle, so she'll need the others to help her save energy. That's when Yui asks if Lloyd can use offensive magic. He says yes, though his spells aren't as strong as his support magic. Daggers goes ahead and assigns everyone's roles. He and Yui will draw the monster's attention first, giving Silica a chance to blast them all at once. At the same time, Cross will hang back to protect both her and Lloyd, who'll be supporting with buffs and healing. Silica confesses she's excited to see Lloyd's support magic in action, but he makes it clear they shouldn't expect anything too spectacular. That statement obviously dampens the team's hopes a bit. Yui even tells him he ought to have a little more confidence, but he reminds them he was kicked out of the hero squad for lack of skill. Cross, for his part, says he'd take Lloyd over some arrogant jerk any day, and the rest of the team agrees. Leaving the tavern, everyone promises to meet again at the inn the next morning. The four veterans head off together, while Lloyd goes his own way. Daggers asks where he's going, since the hotel's in the other direction, and Lloyd sheepishly admits he doesn't have the money to pay for a room. So, the tank tosses him a pouch of coins as an advance for the missions they'll be doing together. Grateful for yet another sign of trust, Lloyd promises to earn every coin, and the shield bearer says that's exactly what he expects from the white mage. That night, back in his room, Lloyd reflects on how kind everyone on this team is and resolves to work hard to repay their kindness. The next day, they all meet up and wait for Yui to come out of her house. She's got a backpack on, unlike the others, and asks why nobody else is carrying one. Cross explains that Lloyd used his storage magic for everyone, meaning he can magically carry all their gear. Yui gets excited and hands her stuff over to the white mage, who uses his staff to stash her things, leaving the leader amazed that carrying heavy loads on the road won't be a problem anymore. Lloyd even offers to teach the trick to the others, who had no idea they could learn it too. According to him, everyone is born with at least a little mana, so with some practice, anyone can do the same. Feeling much lighter, the team heads out toward the farms in high spirits. Once they reach a certain area, Daggers points out that just past these mountains lies the Megocracy, the land of the demons. Right now, they're keeping a low profile, but who knows when they'll make another move to conquer the continent, since that's always their goal. A little further on, the group comes across a terrifying bridge where a fall means certain death. To break the tension, Yui distracts everyone with a question. When you need to come up with something on the spot to get through a tough time, what do you do with water? The others start tossing out answers. I boil it, I spill it, I freeze it, I toss it, I drink it, I pour it over my head. Seeing Lloyd is lost, the captain tells him to join in with his own silly answer. He laments that it's not the kind of skill he picked up from his mentor. So Cross explains the whole point is just to say something goofy on purpose and laugh about being wrong, while Yui says it's their way of keeping their minds relaxed on long journeys. Honestly, Lloyd doesn't really get why they do it. So she says that, even if the mission's tough, staying tense the whole time will just wear everyone out. Then, she hits them with another question. When you split the spoils of a hunt, you divide them evenly? But what do you call someone who forges a completely new path? The three most experienced teammates quickly chime in. Trail Cutter, Pathfinder, and Trail Sharer. Left as the last to answer, Lloyd racks his brain for something to say and blurts out, I've walked a tough path. His friends don't think much of it, but at least he's playing along with the spirit of the game, and that's good enough. Meanwhile, deep in a forest, a hooded figure kneels in prayer before a black stone radiating chaotic energy. Back with the group, since they're not hauling heavy packs, they reach the campsite earlier than expected. It doesn't take long to pitch the tents and set up the fire for their meal. Yui asks if she can bathe now, but Daggers reminds her they still need to gather firewood and look for food. Hearing that, Lloyd volunteers to fetch some wood, giving Yui the chance to drag Silica toward the water. A little while later, after picking up some branches off the ground, Lloyd figures he's found enough to head back. As he stows the wood away, he spots some fruits just like the ones his master once grew with magic, so he bites into one and decides to take a bunch back for the group. Suddenly, he hears a girl scream and rushes toward the sound. At the river, where Yui and Silica were bathing, a huge aquatic creature appears menacingly. Lloyd recognizes it instantly, a basilisk. With the advantage of being in the water, the serpent surges toward the girls, its speed making it impossible for them to escape. They try to retreat as far as they can, but honestly, it's a hopeless effort. Just in time, Lloyd gets close enough to cast an offensive spell at the basilisk, drawing its attention and letting the girls swim to safety. He quickly pulls their weapons out of storage and tosses them over, then gives them both a support spell to help in the fight. As the basilisk lunges at Lloyd, Yui darts forward and slices the beast in half. But even wounded, it refuses to go down without a fight. Seeing the battle isn't over, Silica conjures a fireball and incinerates the creature in a burst of flames. Amid Yui's wild excitement, Silica tries to figure out where she got that much firepower. Their captain thanks the white mage for his help. If it weren't for him, they would have been snake food. As she asks him to put her sword away, she gestures toward the far bank where the scabbard was left. But the motion makes her towel slip off, and she lets out an earth-shattering scream, completely exposed. Later, the team gathers to learn the storage magic. But Yui can't even look anyone in the eye. With a big red handprint on his cheek, Lloyd explains that you just have to create an opening between your palms and put something inside. Honestly, no one really gets it, but they give it a shot anyway. Seeing this isn't getting them anywhere, Lloyd apologizes for not being a better teacher and for being so useless. Daggers tells him not to be so hard on himself, and Cross reminds everyone they're all beginners when it comes to this stuff. Noticing how understanding his friends are, Lloyd finally cracks a smile. Silica gets the idea to say the word storage aloud, and, just like that, magic happens in her hands. Turns out, all they needed was a spell. They're not like Lloyd. By late afternoon, thanks to the new technique, Silica manages to store her staff and gets a round of compliments. Cross tries to do the same with his gear, but only manages to put away half of it. When night falls, the team's white mage sits by the fire while Yui keeps an eye out, noting there are no monsters around. Sensing her mood, Lloyd asks if something's wrong, so she sits down and thanks him for joining the group. He says there's no need, he was in trouble and looking for work anyway. Even so, the captain feels like she forced him onto the team after showing so much concern for their client on this mission. Lloyd asks why she's so invested in this mission, and she confides that it reminds her of her hometown. When Yui was a child, monsters attacked her village, and she was the only survivor, so she couldn't just turn a blind eye when she heard about monsters attacking farms. Plus, smaller settlements would be in serious trouble if they lost their food supplies. In the middle of her story, Lloyd asks her to be quiet and wake the others while he grabs his staff. Once everyone is up, the team hides among the trees to watch a group of giant spiders powlerks crossing an area of the forest, matching the description from their quest. The spiders loop around and start moving toward the group. The adventurers try to retreat quietly, but Yui steps on a branch, alerting the monsters, who immediately give chase. Naturally, the humans run too, but one of the powlerks makes a huge leap, landing right in front of them, giving the other two time to surround the group. Quickly, everyone summons their stored weapons and tries to block the spider's web attacks. Silica, however, gets her staff stuck to a tree with webbing, and before they know it, the whole battlefield is covered in silk, making things harder by the second. In desperation, Daggers asks what they should do, and Lloyd announces he'll make their legs stop moving. Wielding his staff, the white mage conjures several magic circles and tells Yui to go on the offensive. As Daggers blocks another web shot, the swordswoman leaps over him and slashes through a wall of webs that was pinning the team down. With the way clear, Cross jumps into the tree where Silica's staff is stuck and manages to return her weapon. Yui raises her scabbard to shield herself from the powlerk's web shot, bracing against the impact. Using that opening, she rushes in and slices the monster's legs. The second enemy steps up to face her, but meets the same fate, left sprawled and motionless on the ground. Then, as the second powlerk fires its web, Yui uses the force to propel herself straight toward the third spider, gaining just enough momentum to cut off two of its legs in a single strike. Silica jumps in, unleashing a flurry of fireballs. At the same time, Cross fires arrows through each one, triggering an explosion of flames as they hit the spider. With the battle won, Lloyd apologizes to the group for giving orders, but Daggers assures him it was actually a huge help. The white mage has the skill and knowledge for it. In fact, Yui makes it clear that from now on, they're counting on Lloyd to take charge, and the others seem to agree, all but naming him the team's new leader. The next morning, the group breaks camp. Each member packs up their own gear, handling the storage magic themselves. As the others set off, Lloyd finds himself wondering why there were powlerks in this area and where they might be headed. But before he can dwell on it, Yui calls out to him, and he hurries to rejoin the group. At night, when the team set up another camp to spend the night, Lloyd couldn't stop thinking about those creatures' strange behavior. It looked like the entire pack was headed to the same place. Yui interrupted the mage's thoughts to ask if he was going to take the night watch alone again. When he said yes, Silica chimed in, warning that he was going to ruin his health if he kept this up night after night. Lloyd insisted on standing guard so the others could save their strength. Besides, he was used to sleepless nights, and since he was still inexperienced, this was the only way he could really help out. Yui started to grumble that the white mage was more important than he thought. But Silica saw that Lloyd wouldn't budge and decided to let him do as he wished as long as he promised to speak up if it became too much. The next day, as the group continued their journey on foot, the swordswoman kept glancing over at Lloyd for some reason. At one point, she noticed he was able to use a detection spell to sense enemies nearby a pretty advanced magic. Lloyd, however, didn't think much of it. Since his spell couldn't even scan that large an area, he planned to keep casting detection spells at regular intervals to make sure the surroundings were safe, which should help them avoid any surprise monster attacks. Yui worried that this routine might wear him out, but Lloyd assured her he was fine. With a hopeful look, she asked if there was any way she could help, but when he said no, she felt embarrassed and had to admit there was nothing more she could do. That night, while Lloyd was once again keeping watch by the campfire, the group's leader asked Silica if that guy just didn't trust the rest of the team. Sure, he was helpful and always willing, but he never seemed to rely on his companions for anything. Silica explained that everyone had their own pace. She reminded the leader that she and Yui hadn't been that close at first either. Lloyd probably had some self-esteem issues, which made it hard for him to connect with others. He just needed time and space to adjust in his own way. Yui remarked that Lloyd was a real mystery. He didn't know much about ordinary things, but he seemed to know a lot about other stuff. That just made her even more curious about what kind of life he'd led so far. As for that, Silica was certain Lloyd would share his story with them one day, as long as they didn't rush him and gave him the space he needed. The warrior agreed, but wasn't entirely convinced. With someone as unusual as Lloyd, everything might turn out the opposite of what they expected. Speaking of Lloyd, Daggers came over and asked the mage to take a walk with him. Lloyd said he couldn't leave his post, but Cross showed up and offered to take over for him. A few hours later, Daggers finished his work and showed Lloyd the series of bells he'd strung throughout the forest, perfect for alerting them if a monster passed by. With that done, he told Lloyd he could get some rest for the night, but Lloyd refused, feeling like he still had to stand guard. Daggers explained that's exactly what the team had done before the white mage joined them. Lloyd really didn't need to worry. Still unconvinced, Lloyd argued that he wouldn't be able to use his detection magic if he fell asleep. So Daggers got more direct, asking outright if Lloyd didn't trust the team. Caught off guard, Lloyd insisted it was just about being careful, not trust. But Daggers pointed out that Lloyd always took on the job of detection and night watch alone, without including anyone else. It made the others feel like he didn't trust them. That comment made Lloyd remember his old mentor, who'd always said how inexperienced he was, and Alan, who'd called him useless. With those words echoing in his mind, Lloyd stressed that he just didn't want to be a burden to the team. Daggers replied that Lloyd should go ahead and be a burden, because that's what teams are for, to make sure no one has to face every hardship alone. Honestly, the team fully expected Lloyd to make mistakes, but if he did, Daggers wanted him to know that he could count on his friends. Embarrassed, Lloyd realized he'd never even considered that, which made Daggers wonder where this guy had come from. Lloyd hesitated, asking if it was really okay for someone as weak as him to depend on others. But Daggers reassured him no one in the group thought the support mage lacked talent. With that, he invited Lloyd to get some sleep, since they had an early start the next day. Before drifting off, Lloyd thought about everything he'd heard and found himself liking the idea of having friends who actually cared about him. At dawn, Yui stretched like a cat until Lloyd came over and, after a moment's hesitation, asked if she could help him fetch some water. Of course, she agreed, and the rest of the team watched the scene unfold, smiles on their faces. Elsewhere, inside a mansion, a hooded servant informed his master that he would file his report once he and the others finished placing the mage stones at the designated coordinates. The master replied that, with that done, the path was open. He asked about the high-level adventurers operating in Ishtar, and the servant said that the monsters they'd gathered had flooded the adventurers with requests. So most of them were now out of the city, which had been the plan all along. Those who stayed behind were all low level, along with the hero's party. The boss wished he could get rid of that last group, too. But unfortunately, the hero only acted at the kingdom's request. Either way, it would be interesting to see what this team could do alone at the heart of the storm. With that, the servant was told to notify the client that it was time, and took his leave of Lord Michel. Back with the S-rank group, Yui started to sense that something was off in the forest as they made their way through it. The rest of the team agreed there was something strange in the air, especially when Cross pointed out that they hadn't run into a single monster since entering this deep part of the woods. Yui asks if Lloyd did anything with his magic, but he says no. He's been using his detection spell periodically, but that doesn't actually keep the monsters away. Speaking of which, he expands his search radius and spots a pack of monsters about 10 miles ahead. Checking the map, Cross realizes that direction puts them right near the farm where the group is headed. Yui raises an eyebrow. Didn't Lloyd say he couldn't scan that large an area? Lloyd admits that 10 miles doesn't feel like much to him. Silica points out that's 10 times more than average. But even though everyone's a little freaked out by the white mage's power, the team tries to keep calm and focus on the situation at hand. 10 miles later, they arrive at the mission's farm. And sure enough, there's a massive pack of dire wolves surrounding the place. But that's not what catches Lloyd's attention. What really stands out is the fact that this is the only spot his search magic is picking up any monsters at all. So, where did all the others go? Silica and the others agree it's seriously weird. There should be plenty of other creatures as strong as these wolves in the area. So it's not like the wolves just wiped out all the competition. Lloyd asks where the current owner of the farm is, and Yui says she heard he was injured by a dire wolf and is staying at his son's place in town. Suddenly, Cross points out something black and ominous in the middle of the farm, but no one else can see it. His eyesight is way better than the rest of the group's. Taking that into account, Lloyd casts a spell to enhance his own vision, and now he can see it. A magic stone radiating dark energy. He quickly uses the same spell on the others so they can see it too, and after a quick analysis, the white mage starts to believe that the shadowy mist swirling around the stone is beastfolk mana. Lloyd remembers his mentor mentioning that there are beastmen capable of using a rare magic to command monsters, and it sure seems like this magic stone is behind what's happening at the farm. Just then, Lloyd detects another wave of monsters heading their way, more than 1,000 creatures from all sorts of species. At that point, the boy is sure everything is connected to that giant magic stone, which must have the power to attract beasts. He wonders if someone is trying to get rid of them, but decides that would be way too indirect if that were the case. Cross thinks they should fall back, but Yui refuses. If they retreat, the monsters will destroy every field in the area. The archer asks if she really plans to take on 1,000 monsters at once, and she falls silent. On the other hand, Daggers doubts they could even escape from so many enemies, and Silica adds that if the monsters chase them, and there's a battle near town, the townspeople could be in serious danger. Finally, Lloyd decides the best move is to fight, and he's already got a plan. First step, deal with that magic stone. He asks the archer if he can hit it from here. Cross figures he probably can, but doubts he can destroy it. Lloyd says that's fine, it'll be enough. So Cross readies his bow. At the same time, the support mage provides a boost to make up for the lack of firepower. And when the arrow flies with the added buff, it's enough to shatter the magic stone. Impressed, Cross asks what Lloyd just did, and Lloyd explains that he simply cast enhancement magic on the archer, the bow, and the arrows. Cross can't believe the guy can buff people and weapons at the same time. But once again, Lloyd just thought that was standard procedure. Besides, he only cast the spell. The real skill was Cross nailing a shot from that distance. Immediately, the group watches as the wolves revert to their natural ferocity after the stone shatters, turning on each other and starting to fight. Yui asks if Lloyd expected that when he decided to break the magic stone. He says it was obvious that thing was manipulating the beast's behavior. On the other hand, he'd also thought it was controlling the approaching horde, but apparently not, since that enormous mass of monsters is still closing in at full speed. And then, the horde finally draws dangerously close to the 4 humans standing against it. Since the white mage claimed he could tank the beasts, Yui tells him it's time to do something, but he replies that the timing still isn't right. The rest of the team starts to get seriously nervous in the face of such a threat, while the mage stays calm, waiting for the perfect moment. So, when 3 wolves lunge at Silica, Lloyd tells her to react. She fires back with a firestorm spell. Even she's amazed at how intense her magic is. She's never seen anything that powerful come from her staff before. Yui demands to know what kind of sorcery Lloyd pulled off, and he explains he just used magic power boost and mana cost reduction on her. The firestorm rages across the land, engulfing the horde in flames, but Lloyd tells Silica to cast it again, and then follow up with a wind spell. Cross realizes that the flames and the monsters will keep burning after the wind magic fans the fire. Plus, the smoke will make it harder for the flying monsters to see. Next, Lloyd initiates a telepathy spell with the archer to share the exact enemy positions he's detected. With their locations clear in his mind, Cross is able to ignore the smoke and land pinpoint shots on the winged beasts swooping down from above. Up to this point, everything's going according to plan, but Lloyd isn't one to leave things to chance, so he stays in command, making sure they wrap this up. He tells Silica it's time for the final phase, and she warns him her mana is almost gone. So the boy places his hand on hers and performs a mana transfer. The whole ordeal was so intense it left Lloyd completely dazed. He'd poured so much magic energy into his ally that he felt drained himself. But still, he told her to focus back on the fight. Silica raised her staff and cast Luvia, unleashing a powerful downpour that snuffed out the fire before it could spiral out of control, drenching the entire forest. After pulling off such a powerful spell, the mage was out of mana for good. She lost control of her body and just collapsed. Luckily, Daggers was there to catch her before she hit the ground. Yui assured her friend that they'd handle the rest. Silica, struggling to even speak, told them not to push themselves too hard. The swordswoman couldn't help but laugh at the irony, hearing that from someone who had nearly passed out from trying too hard herself. Putting that aside, Yui pointed out that Lloyd had been brilliant for coming up with a plan like that. But, true to his rock-bottom self-esteem, Lloyd just shrugged it off and said he hadn't done anything special, just what any support should do. Seeing there was no changing this guy's mind, Yui gave up on the pep talk and drew her sword, ready to finish the job. Daggers hoisted his shield, moving to stand by her side as they squared up for the next round. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Silica lay back on the grass, exhausted, as if they'd just climbed Mount Everest. Frustrated that he was worn out from just this, Lloyd realized he still had a long road ahead of him. A moment later, a beastwoman lets out a terrified scream after being grabbed by a demon. A beastman, who looks a lot like her, dashes in to save her, but he can't catch the attacker. Frustrated, he unleashes a furious roar, vowing that the demon will pay for what he's done. Meanwhile, back with the group of adventurers, Lloyd, having recovered from his exhaustion, comes to a realization. Whoever's behind all of this is targeting Ishtar, which means they've all been deceived. As they set out again, the white mage conjures up several vials filled with a purple liquid, emphasizing that this mission was probably a trap from the start. By sending high-level adventurers away on previous missions, their enemies were actually drawing them away from Ishtar, weakening the city's defenses. Cross argues that Ishtar still has the hero and the knights to protect it, but Daggers admits that Lloyd's deduction is starting to make too much sense. Either way, the archer reminds everyone that the Magistone they saw earlier was strange too, and the whole group agrees the city might be in danger, and they need to head back immediately. So, Lloyd packs away the box of potions after drinking one himself, then casts a support spell on his allies. Suddenly, he takes off at an inhuman speed, leaving his friends in awe. Without really understanding what's going on, they all bolt after him, feeling light as feathers. On the way, Lloyd explains that he simply cast a speed boost spell on everyone. Elsewhere, back at the secluded mansion, the demon who kidnapped the beastwoman arrives. Michelle welcomes her esteemed client, but the visitor asks not to be called that. The host just laughs and says that Great General Grist sounds way too formal anyway. Grist then warns that the vanguard is closing in on Ishtar, and that their plan is working, all thanks to that woman. Speaking of which, he hopes she'll be useful in the future too. Michelle agrees she's a special one, and they stand to gain a lot by using her. Grist doesn't quite get what he means by that, but considering people once called him the Demon Lord's right-hand man, the least he can do is trust his talent. As for the rest, the man insists he can do anything as long as he's paid well for it. Meanwhile, the beast girl who was kidnapped is now locked up in a cell. Michelle appears with a box of potions, announcing that it's time to borrow her power. He then uses a machine to manipulate a black magistone and set his wicked plan in motion. Back in the forest, Lloyd and his group are racing toward the city of Ishtar. After a long run, they stop to catch their breath. Lloyd summons the same box of purple potions and hands one to each person. Silica worries the mage will run out of mana if he keeps buffing everyone all the way to Ishtar, but he assures her he's gotten so much practice that he barely uses any magical energy. Impressed, she asks if he's done this many times before, and he just shrugs. It's something you get used to after a while. According to the white mage, a long time ago, his mentor dumped him in a forest far from civilization and made him find his way home alone as training. For a white mage, fighting monsters alone is nearly impossible. Running away was all he could do. To survive, Lloyd had to use every type of enhancement magic he knew, and that training was nothing short of hell for the young mage. Yui comments that he really went through the ringer as a kid, but Lloyd just considers himself inexperienced. He's convinced it was a normal form of training, especially since his mentor was always scolding him. Either way, in his mind, it ended up being a pretty effective method. Yui and Silica completely disagree, insisting Lloyd's training was neither normal nor healthy. That gets him thinking maybe, just maybe, he hasn't trained enough. After all, he's traveling with a team of S-rank adventurers while he's nowhere near that level, and he feels like he needs to work even harder to catch up. The girls sigh, lamenting that the guys gotta screw loose, but decide not to push it any further. As the saying goes, it takes one lunatic to understand another. Finally, Daggers calls everyone back to the road, and the white mage does what he does best. He layers enhancement spells together, which ends up triggering a detection spell to sense for possible enemies nearby. Hours later, they've already made their way through the thick forest and are closing in on Ishtar. The girls in the group praise how fast they've been able to travel without ever losing their breath until Lloyd, without warning, slams on the brakes, causing a pile-up with all his teammates. After rolling to a very undignified stop, Cross demands to know why he stopped so suddenly. Lloyd explains that his detection spell picked something up, not that he knows exactly what. But the feeling is so ominous that he has a terrible sense of foreboding. The white mage asks the others to continue on to Ishtar while he checks out the situation himself. Yui offers to go with him, since this could turn into a real fight and a white mage shouldn't go in alone. The rest of the team quickly insists on joining too. Nobody wants to leave their friend to face the unknown by himself. Meanwhile, 4 figures in black robes gather around a magical artifact to demonstrate their power once again. Sometime later, as night falls, Lloyd and his companions reach a cabin. He can sense demons nearby, along with someone of a different race. Yui, worried, asks if he means demons from the Megacracy, which he confirms. Before they'd headed out here, Daggers had mentioned that beyond these steep mountains lay the Megacracy, the nation of demons. According to the tank, that race has been hiding out lately, but could emerge at any moment to try and conquer the continent. Lloyd remembers that demons are supposed to be strictly forbidden from entering the 3 main nations of the continent. But Yui points out that the Megacracy isn't exactly known for respecting rules, they're famous for leading violent invasions. She also asks if Lloyd has any memories of the Megacracy from when he was younger. But he says he remembers nothing from his childhood. The war was already over by the time he went to live with his mentor. Silica realizes the mage is a war orphan, while Yui apologizes for suggesting Lloyd didn't care. But the mage isn't bothered by that. He's much more concerned about the possibility of demons invading the cabin right in front of them. Cross suggests they should report this to the knights once they're back in town, but the mage wants to gather more information before leaving. Even though it's dangerous, Lloyd can sense that same mana from the Magistone, and Daggers thinks it might be related to those monsters that attacked the farm. Lloyd agrees, adding that if Ishtar is their real target, then it's worth the risk to investigate further. Yui agrees they need to keep a close watch, though Silica isn't happy about it, but the warrior insists they have to stop any possible invaders from threatening Ishtar, since the city is already under threat. The rest of the group is impressed by her leadership, and they all agree that this might be the key to resolving the situation. With everyone on board, the group quietly approaches the cabin. Cross peers through the window, but it seems empty inside. At that, Lloyd casts his detection spell again and senses the enemy presence underground. He asks Silica to use her earth magic and give the party a buff. Silica conjures the sandbox and collapses the ceiling right on top of the hooded figures gathered below. Yui wastes no time. She bursts in and takes down the first man. She demands to know who they are and what they're doing in this nation. But one of the men reacts, lifting the fallen stones with magic and hurling them at her. She's quick, deflecting the rocks with her sword. Cross fires an arrow, hitting the attacker just as his ally tries to escape. Lloyd buffs Silica, who casts the sandbox again to keep up the offensive. Another enemy retaliates with more levitation magic, launching the rocks back with force. Daggers jumps in to shield everyone with his shield, and seeing their attacks aren't working, the hooded figures start to panic and flee. Yui chases after one of the escapees, only to run right into an ambush, but Cross covers her with his bow, taking down 2 more enemies before they can harm her. Now, only one remains. The last one runs over to the Beastwoman prisoner and casts a spell that wraps her in some sort of cocoon, then begins levitating her out of there. But the adventurers rush in to set things straight. The man dashes up the stairs, and Lloyd tells Yui to circle around and cut him off, as she sprints to intercept and calls for Cross to help. The mage picks up on a powerful magical signature coming from inside the cocoon. Before long, Yui and the group's archer manage to corner the fugitive. But he doesn't surrender. He unleashes a flurry of lightning bolts instead. Lloyd throws up magical shields to protect everyone, until finally one of the bolts hits the caster himself, knocking him out. With the threat neutralized, Lloyd dispels the cocoon and discovers the prisoner is a beastwoman. The adventurers quickly bring her inside the cabin. Silica guesses she must be from the Fora's Empire, judging by her features. Everyone assumes she can shed some light on what's happening, so they have Lloyd try to revive her. The mage casts an exceptionally powerful healing spell, the same one Yui saw cure Sylvie before she turned to Magistone. On top of that, Lloyd says he's improved the spell since then. Yui is shocked. She had no idea adventurers could actually improve magic like that, leaving Lloyd a bit baffled by her reaction. Silica, equally surprised, agrees being able to alter a spell is incredible. Lloyd explains that his mentor often forced him to help with things like that. He remembers all too well every 5 minutes she'd come up with something new, asking him to help with her spells to stop aging, cure baldness, or treat athlete's foot. Day by day, Lloyd's more convinced his master is downright eccentric. Yui, on the other hand, doesn't think that word even begins to cover what that woman is really like. Either way, the healing works, and the Beastwoman wakes up. Yui, barely able to contain her excitement, starts firing questions at the poor woman about the situation. Eventually, she reveals her name, Kiriha, the human, asks why she was kept captive by those demons, but Kiriha seems too frightened to answer right away. Seeing this, Lloyd explains that they're adventurers, sent on a mission to protect a farm from a monster horde, and that he sensed the mana of a beastfolk nearby. From what he's heard, some beastfolk can control monsters through magic, and maybe, just maybe, Kiriha was responsible for what happened at the farm. At that, Kiriha confesses it was her spell that caused the whole mess. Meanwhile, out in the forest, two Ishtar scouts stumble upon a gigantic magistone and realize that a huge number of creatures are lurking in the woods, guarding the object. With no hope of fighting, they turn to flee only for one to be taken down instantly by vicious wolves. At the same time, an army of creatures begins to march through the forest toward the city. Back at the cabin, the adventurers are stunned to learn there really is a spell capable of controlling monsters. Kiriha confirms the demons forced her to use that power, turning it into a weapon which all but confirms that the Magocracy is behind the attack on Ishtar, since the city is a crucial strategic point for conquering the whole continent. The big issue now is that, if the demons' plan was to leave the city's defenses wide open, Ishtar might already be in serious danger. Given the circumstances, the group rushes back toward Ishtar with Kiriha joining them. Lloyd feels bad for dragging her into all this, but she admits she'd be in even bigger trouble if they left her behind. After some time running, they stop for a quick break, all anxious to reach the city before it falls to the looming threat at its gates. Lloyd uses his detection magic and senses a monster horde heading for the city. But that's not all. There's a massive army coming right behind them. Yui turns to the mage and asks what they should do next. In response, he asks to borrow Kiriha's power. At the same time, he tells the others to warn the town about the looming danger and get ready for what's coming. Yui threatens to protest the decision, but Lloyd points out that no one person can handle two things at once and reassures her that everything will work out as long as they work together. Bolstered by his words, the group quickly grasps how serious things are. The white mage then casts an enhancement spell to make the allies' perilous journey a little easier. With that, Yui, Daggers, Cross, and Silica set out for Ishtar, while Lloyd and Kiriha head off to pursue their own mission. Meanwhile, back at his group's mansion, Alan was furious. Every single candidate for recruitment was terrible. In his opinion, these guys were even more useless than that piece of trash, especially since none of them even used storage magic. Mia complained that their limit was just 2 enhancement spells at once. The rest of the group began to wonder if maybe Lloyd was actually exceptional, and the leader had simply never seen it. Still, Alan stubbornly insisted that the kid was nothing special. In the middle of all this, a royal knight stepped into the office to deliver news from a patrol in the forest. At that moment, a horde of over 10,000 monsters was advancing toward Ishtar, and the army needed their group of adventurers to help form the defensive lines. Hearing this, Alan saw a golden opportunity to make a name for himself. He ordered word sent to the troops that they'd be ready for battle soon, especially since it was a royal request, and now he could finally prove he was the most powerful warrior in the kingdom. Meanwhile, not far away, Lloyd and Yui were already keeping an eye on that massive horde. To the support mage, it even looked bigger than the one marching toward Ishtar. If a horde this large joined the main force, Ishtar wouldn't stand a chance. That's why they'd made the right call in moving ahead to decide on a plan. From here on out, the goal was simple: find a way to defeat these enemies. Kiriha, however, wanted to know if there was any way to do it without harming the monsters, since they were being controlled and not acting on their own. What made it worse was that the one controlling them was using beastfolk powers, something that weighed heavily on her conscience. Seeing her worry, the man promised to find a way to avoid hurting them as much as possible. After all, it's always better to solve things without needless violence. With that in mind, he asked if it was possible for Kiriha to use her magic to send the monsters back home. She explained that probably not, there were simply too many. In that case, the mage suggested boosting her magic to try it anyway. She agreed to give it a shot. The support mage began preparing his buff to enhance her power, but her spell ended up being blocked. That's when she realized something in the forest was interfering. Back at the Adventurers Guild, Alan was gathered with the other warriors who would join the kingdom's battle force. As usual, he was acting arrogant and belittling everyone else's skills, acting like he was leagues above them, especially since all the rank A adventurers and higher were out of the city. Only B rank and below were left. Hearing the hero's taunts, several adventurers were already seething with irritation. But for Alan, of course, this meant nothing. He even pushed it further, calling them nothing more than neat shields for the strongest to shine. Abusing his status as a hero, Alan made more and more enemies until the guild branch director arrived to restore order, reminding everyone that the real enemies were the monsters, and there was no time for infighting. Not wanting to lose the spotlight, Alan raised his voice and laid out his brilliant battle plan. First, every mage would unleash their most powerful spells, the kind that go boom. If each one could take out around 10 monsters, the infantry could move forward and buy more time. Then the mages would fire another round, and so on. At that, one of the mages raised her hand and admitted she couldn't cast anything that strong. Another said he could take down maybe one enemy at a time, tops. Alan exploded at these statements, claiming everyone there should be able to do far more. But even Maya confessed she wasn't feeling very confident. Her spells had gotten weaker, and she couldn't cast the same way anymore. That only made Alan angrier. He demanded to know why she hadn't mentioned something so important earlier, and she explained that she wasn't the only one. Lulu, Sheena, and Lena had all been weaker ever since Lloyd left the group. Alan felt betrayed, but Lena quickly pointed out that it was the leader's fault for never paying attention in the first place. He had become so sure of himself that he simply ignored the warnings they'd been trying to give for a long time. In fact, she added, because of that, she didn't think he was even qualified to call himself a hero. Fuming at her words, Alan swung a punch at her, but she blocked it with ease. Under the weight of everyone's judgmental stares, the hero completely lost it and stormed out of the guild. His teammates chased after him, all except Lena. The remaining adventurers quickly realized that this so-called hero wasn't anything like the rumors claimed, and morale dropped sharply. Noticing this, Lena decided to take responsibility. She assured the adventurers she would leave the hero's party, cut ties with him, and join the others on the front lines. On top of that, she suggested they bring in a certain mage named Lloyd. And speaking of the support mage, he had just discovered the source of the problem controlling the hordes. A massive magic stone, almost identical to the one from the farm. Kiriha noted that it was imbued with a dark power that interfered with her spells. There were probably several scattered around, so if they wanted to regain control of the situation, they'd have to deal with all of them. The beast woman could sense the magic stones if she got close enough, but in such a wide area, that was difficult. So, Lloyd combined telepathy with a search spell to extend her senses. On top of that, with a concealment spell, he could bring her close to the stones without the monsters noticing, though the spell would break if they took a heavy hit. So caution was key. With that plan, they approached the first magic stone and neutralized its power. Now, it was on to the next one. Meanwhile, the defenses of Ishtar close in, bracing themselves for the arrival of the enemy horde. One of the soldiers wonders aloud if this is really the right thing to do. And the guild branch director understands his concern after all. The lives of every single fighter here depend on one man. Hours earlier, back at the guild, Lena had explained that Lloyd, the white mage, was the true pillar of the hero's party, not the figures the public knew best. The truth was, everyone had been so blinded by the glorification of the hero that they'd completely overlooked the person who actually made things happen. The director asked if Lloyd was really the one responsible for the brilliant way the strongest adventurer group fought, and the warrior confirmed it without hesitation. What's more, she assured him that this war could only be won with the white mage's help. The problem was, she had no idea where he was, since the director kept track of all registered adventurers. He explained that Lloyd had gone on a mission with an S-rank group, and even the trip alone would take several days. Still, Lena believed he could arrive much sooner using some kind of travel magic, unless he was tied up with that mission at the moment. Either way, she hoped everyone would trust that the mage was doing exactly what needed to be done right now. Back in the present, the director explained that everyone had agreed to Lena's proposal, but doubt still lingered after all. They all wanted to protect their families, their friends, and everyone they loved. At last, the horde arrived for battle. Lena ordered the archers to loose their arrows. The volley struck down part of the front line of monsters, and then the shield bearers shouted for the advancing enemies to be pushed into the trench, while the mages hurled fireballs toward the oncoming swarm. Waves of water followed, flooding the trenches to drown the creatures and widen the pit, making it even harder for the enemy to cross. The plan was simple. Hold out until the S-rank adventurers returned, only then would they stand a real chance. Speaking of which, Yui and her companions pressed on toward Ishtar, bolstered by Lloyd's support magic, which kept everyone from exhausting themselves along the way. The mere presence of the white mage was enough to inspire them to give their all. He had become the prime example of what it meant to do what was necessary. Even at night, they refused to rest. Every lost minute was a minute the city was being brutally attacked. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Kiriha finally reached the last magic stone, guarded by high-rank wolves and blood panthers. When the beast woman disabled the stone, the wild look vanished from the creature's eyes, but that only revealed another problem. Wolves and panthers were natural enemies, and now the two species were turning on each other. As the first two clashed, they knocked over the magic stone. In that instant, Kiriha lost her invisibility, and every beast in sight turned their snarling gaze toward her. To save his ally, Lloyd cast a spell to draw all their attention onto himself. At Ishtar's gates, some monsters managed to leap over the trench and reach the shield bearers, who raised their shields to block the assault and shove them back in. On the front line, with her guard up and leading the tanks, Lena was informed that the right flank had taken severe damage. As if that weren't enough, the defensive line broke, allowing the monsters to pour in. At that critical moment, the S-rank adventurers finally arrived. Elsewhere, Lloyd kept the enemies occupied with his physical enhancement spells. Though that didn't mean he could take them all on at once. Kureha knew he was only able to avoid the monsters with great skill, not defeat them outright. Even so, despite not being able to fight them head-on, this human was doing everything in his power to protect her. To honor his sacrifice, the beast woman began to sing. Her voice stirred a strange energy that wrapped around her body, catching the attention of every monster nearby. Reaching out to them, she slowly coaxed the beasts to back away. When Lloyd rushed over to ask what she had done, Kureha explained that she had simply convinced them to return to the forest. Her spell didn't control them. It only allowed her to share her thoughts with them. Lloyd thanked her for saving him, and she returned the sentiment. In the end, they had each risked themselves for the other. With that settled, they needed to head for Ishtar at once. At the city gates, the S-rank adventurers joined the defensive forces, doing everything they could to hold back the thousands of monsters pressing in without mercy. Even with reinforcements, the sheer number of enemies soon began to overwhelm them. The front line started to collapse. The archers were running out of arrows, and the mages were nearly drained of mana. Still, Lena stood as the most inspiring figure on the field, the pillar holding the front line together, making everyone believe that if they could just endure, victory would come. But determination alone couldn't change reality. Warriors were falling in droves, the defenses were crumbling, and the threat was growing more terrifying by the minute. The branch director knew the army was at its limit. They couldn't hold out any longer. Just then, Kureha appeared on the battlefield and began to sing her spell. The sweet, lilting voice of the young beast woman carried through the chaos, calming the savage eyes of the creatures that had been attacking so fiercely. And then, as if by some miracle, the monsters turned around and simply began to walk away slowly, peacefully, impossibly calm. Yui's group spotted Lloyd and erupted in relief. Seeing how drained Kureha was from her singing, the white mage steadied her by the shoulders to make sure she was alright. He was awestruck by her ability, just as she was by his support magic after all. She never could have cast her spell across such a vast battlefield without him. She asks what kind of help he provided, and Lloyd explains that he cast several layers of mana consumption reduction and magical power boost. Still, no matter how much he contributed, the mage knows it was the girl who did most of the work, and he makes sure to point that out. With that, the beast woman reveals that her real name is Claire, but before the moment can sink in, stone giants arrive at Ishtar's walls, making it clear that the war is far from over. A day later, Michelle looked over a map with delight, imagining that Ishtar must be under siege by 30,000 monsters at that very moment. But then, a messenger rushed into his mansion to report that the advancing horde had suddenly begun to scatter. Deep in the forest, Claire lamented that the golems couldn't hear her, while Lloyd suspected some kind of demonic interference to reach the front lines before the monsters. The support mage cast a spell that boosted their speed, dodging through the enemy ranks and nearly being crushed in the process. The two finally made it safely to the moat that guarded the city gates. Without hesitation, Lloyd wrapped his arm around his companion's waist and leapt across the gap, a feat that left every soldier watching in awe. From that moment on, their spirits lifted, reassured by the presence of the young mage who had already proven himself far above the ordinary. One by one, his fellow S-rank companions arrived as well, celebrating the fact that the monsters had retreated. Lloyd gave the credit to Claire, but when Yui and Silica heard the name, they were confused because they could have sworn the girl's name was Kureha. Still, there was no time to dwell on it. The golems had yet to arrive, and the main support mage at the trench was already utterly drained after such a fierce fight. Even so, despite his exhaustion, Lloyd knew he had to stay on his feet and keep fighting. The future of Ishtar depended on it. Just then, the guild branch director appeared to lend a hand, and Lloyd asked him to protect Claire during the battle. The man immediately ordered a squad of knights to guard the beast girl. Before she left, Lloyd thanked her, admitting that without her help, the outcome would have been far worse. She shook her head, saying it was the other way around, that they had saved her. The guild director declared that Lloyd was the city's only hope, a statement that made the boy uneasy. Lena explained Alan had refused to join the war. After quarreling with a few adventurers at the guild, he simply abandoned his duty. Lloyd pointed out that thousands of lives were at stake, but Lena scoffed, saying that man was no hero. At that, Lena faltered, clutching the deep wound in her abdomen. Lloyd, though nearly drained of magic, managed to heal her completely. The effort left him so weak he nearly collapsed, and she had to hold him up. She told him that thanks to his support magic, their party had always been the strongest. even if Lloyd himself couldn't see how powerful he truly was. She admitted that she had never realized just how vital he'd been to their group. She hadn't even stopped the others from casting him out. With tears in her eyes, she apologized. But Lloyd still believed he'd been expelled because he was too weak. Before they could speak further, the golems finally reached the moat. The soldiers at the front charged in recklessly, and Lloyd tried to warn them that these weren't ordinary golems. It was too late. Several warriors leapt into battle only to be slaughtered instantly. Seeing this, Lena raised her shield and ordered volleys of fireballs. But just like the arrows before them, the blasts barely scratched the monster's stone armor. One after another, the golems pushed across the moat, forcing the defenders back step by step. Even on the verge of collapse, Lloyd prepared to buff the troops. His allies pointed out there were dozens of soldiers, but he assured them he could handle it not all at once, but in rotating groups. Quickly, he laid physical enchantments on the frontline fighters while boosting the magical units with greater firepower. His own party members also received enhancements, though everyone knew the effects wouldn't last long. Meanwhile, Yui scrambled up a wooden platform to rally the soldiers. She shouted that Lloyd had strengthened several warriors who could now meet the golems head-on. The troops still doubted they could stand against such giants until Lena proved it herself. Bracing her shield, she stopped a giant's fist dead in its tracks. To drive the point home, Yui vaulted onto a golem and split it clean in half with a single sword strike. Lena reminded everyone that this was only possible because of Lloyd's magic. Slowly, the soldiers began to realize their bodies felt lighter, and even the weapons and armor that once weighed them down seemed easier to carry. In the midst of the chaos, Lloyd gave orders. Cross was to back up the magic units, while Daggers was tasked with protecting Silica so she could bombard the front lines safely. As for Lloyd himself, he could barely stay standing, so the guild director carried him to a safer spot from which he could continue supporting. From then on, the archers worked hand in hand with the mages, unleashing blazing arrows that proved effective against the golems, cutting down several under Cross's lead. At the front, Daggers planted his massive shield before Silica, giving her the protection she needed to rain devastating spells on the enemy. After a long stretch of brutal fighting, the defenders finally whittled the enemy down to a single golem. To end the war once and for all, a soldier charged in and struck with his sword, but the blade shattered on impact, and the man was crushed by a single punch. That could mean only one thing. Lloyd's enhancements had just worn off. With their strength fading, panic swept through the troops, and they began fleeing in terror. The last golem pressed forward, reaching the gates. Yui planted herself in its path, but Lena shoved her aside to save her life. Daggers stepped up next, shield raised to block the strike, yet the sheer weight of the blow sent the tank crashing to the ground. In a final move, faced with his lack of power, Lloyd manages to enchant Yui's weapon. Realizing this, the girl calls upon the support of the squires Daggers and Lena. With the sword in hand, the young swordswoman waits for the golem to throw another punch, and when the blow is absorbed by the shields, she takes advantage of the enemy's lowered guard to deliver the strike that would end the battle. Watching the fight from afar, the mysterious mage mutters to himself that Lloyd seems to be thriving far more in a real battlefield than he ever did with his group of adventurers. Meanwhile, the great General Grist storms into Michelle's mansion in a fury, determined to announce that their enemies have rescued the Beast Woman. But Michelle is not there, which drives the demon into such a rage that he smashes his host's table clean in half. With his plans crumbling, Grist begins to suspect Michelle's interference, and so he decides to turn against his former ally. Sometime later, Lloyd awakens in the inn's bed. Yui sitting by his side, tending to her friend. The mage laments not being strong enough to endure the entire fight, but she reminds him that he is far greater and far more cherished than he believes. Outside his room, dozens of townsfolk press against the door, hoping for just a glimpse of the battle's hero. All the attention unsettles Lloyd so much that he slams the door shut in their faces. If his self-esteem is low, his shyness is sky high, and it would never allow him to handle so many people swarming over him. Yui opens the door and tells him to step out with his head held high. He does leave, though through the window, with his head down, hoping the fall wouldn't kill him. Far away, the mage who had been following Lloyd's steps arrives at a small cottage. The moment he tries to open the door, an explosion greets him. Lloyd's former master had cast a spell the instant she sensed something suspicious nearby. She demands to know how he survived the blast, but like any true magician, he never reveals his secrets. Inside, he comes face to face with old acquaintances, Lily and Thor. Lily greets him as the Phantom Alchemist, since he abandoned potion making to focus entirely on gathering information. Lloyd's master admits she hasn't seen him in years, and so she asks about her old apprentice. The alchemist explains that the boy was cast out of the hero's party, but reassures her there's nothing to worry about. Lloyd has now joined an S-rank group. More than that, he has very important news about this young support mage. Back at the inn, after fleeing the crowd, Lloyd is cornered by his teammates, who demand to know why he's running from everyone. They explain that nobody's chasing him to invite him to dinner, it's just the townspeople's way of showing gratitude, since he saved the city. True to his insecure nature, Lloyd insists he only gave a little assistance in the war. His friend, however, make it crystal clear, he needs to stop setting such impossible standards for himself, because it's only tormenting him. Instead, he should learn to have far more confidence in who he is. In the cottage, the Phantom Alchemist confides that Lloyd has no idea how truly capable he is, a blind spot that could harm not only his own well-being, but also his relationships with everyone around him. Saddened, Lloyd's master admits she would hate to think her student might repeat the same mistakes she once made. In Ishtar's central square, Yui persuades Lloyd to appear before the people. Immediately, the crowd raises their mugs and fists high, cheering for the savior of the city. Lloyd, in turn, insists they should thank the warriors who fought so bravely for the territory's safety. Yet those very soldiers step forward, declaring they could never have fought without the unwavering support of the great mage. With no room left to argue, Lloyd is crowned, at least in the people's hearts, the great hero of Ishtar. Not long after, Alan hears the news. The teammate he once cast aside has become a celebrity, hailed for carrying the city's army on his back during battle. As expected, he is anything but pleased, especially since his own title of hero is about to be stripped away after refusing to lend aid in the fight. With no patience for the situation, the party leader orders his subordinates to pack their things. They're leaving the city at once. After all, this place now sees Lloyd as the savior of the land, and Alan can't stand to stay another day. Back in the forest cottage, the Phantom Alchemist explains that Lloyd's new party is filled with elite adventurers, including a 17-year-old swordswoman, a true prodigy. As the conversation unfolds, a cup of drink is poured for each member at the table. They all take a sip, and the alchemist raises his glass, honored to drink alongside such a legendary group. Lily cuts him off, urging him to stop with the pleasantries. He already knows why they're here. According to Thor, today is the day they honor Sybil. On that note, the alchemist reveals that the demon race has been controlling monsters to conquer Ishtar. They've been exploiting orc magic, and the troubling question is, why are the demons acting now? Of all times, it almost seems as if the Demon King has returned. At this, Lloyd's master snaps, declaring that monster was exterminated long ago. There's no chance of his return. Otherwise, everything Sybil achieved would be for nothing. Thor calms her, pointing out that the possibility is slim, and anxiety won't change anything. To protect the future Sybil created, they must give everything they have right now. Back in the city, the S-rank adventurers are summoned by the young Lord of Ishtar. Upon entering his mansion, they are surprised to find Claire waiting inside. Only then do they learn that the Beast Woman has been welcomed as a guest of honor by the Lord of this land. At last, the young man introduces himself properly, Lord Abel Lucas. Cross admitted that at first, he thought the guy was either the gardener or the butler of the house. Not even the rest of the team believed this boy was actually the one in charge of everything, especially since they'd heard the Lord had been in that position for over 10 years. Naturally, everyone assumed he'd be at least a little older. Puzzled, Abel Lucas asked if he didn't look older, and Silica replied that he didn't even seem older than they were. According to the Lord, keeping up appearances takes effort. Yui muttered that this seemed like far more than just effort. When Lloyd remembered that his master also looked unusually young, he and Yui began to suspect it might be some kind of beautification magic. Abel laughed and promised to share a few tricks on preserving youth, but only after they discussed what really mattered. Meanwhile, on the staircase of a castle in another kingdom, a beastman despaired over finding no clue about Claire's whereabouts. Despite searching for so long, suddenly, a guard rushed in, calling out to Syrian. The young lady Claire had finally been found. At that very moment, Lloyd and his companions were stunned to discover that Claire was none other than the second princess of the Foraz Empire, a peaceful nation where the orcs lived. Abel Lucas then asked what they thought of the Beastwoman's magic. Lloyd admitted it was impressive, but also terrifying, given that it could be used to control monsters. Abel agreed that her power was truly one of a kind. That was exactly why they could never allow the demons to capture her, and why the Empire had been searching for her all along. In the end, it was these adventurers who had saved the princess. Speaking of which, Abel Lucas revealed a mission worthy of heroes like them. The Empire would certainly try to reclaim Claire, but the Lord of Ishtar wanted the group to escort her safely to Sylphs, the capital of the Kingdom of Furin. The party hesitated, pointing out that escorting someone of such importance seemed more like a task for royal knights than for simple adventurers. But Lord Abel explained that sending knights would draw far too much attention. He feared the demons would immediately realize that such a critical piece was being moved across the board. For that reason, Claire herself insisted on entrusting her safety to the adventurers before her. Once the meeting was over, everyone gathered outside to prepare for departure. Claire asked them to call her simply by her name, even if the adventurers felt uneasy about addressing a princess so informally. Yui, however, slipped off her glove and offered the Beastwoman a friendly handshake, giving the others the confidence they needed to relax in her presence. With that, Lloyd declared it was time to head for the royal capital. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.